The night sky above Meridio's Prime was a blood-tinged smear, heavy with storms, but Commander Riven Salas barely noticed. His boots struck the cracked asphalt of Dockyard Delta with sharp precision, each step echoing through the abandoned loading bay. A storm was coming, and not just from the skies. He adjusted the settings on his pulse rifle, glancing at the alien figure beside him. Officer Vena Katil moved with a predator's grace, her silver-scaled skin glistening under the dull floodlights, her psi-blade humming softly in its sheath. Together, they approached the warehouse's yawning entrance, a forgotten scar at the edge of the city. The tip had been anonymous, the coordinates hidden beneath layers of scrambling code only someone desperate or foolish would attempt to decrypt. Still, something about the plea, the sheer rawness of it, had unsettled Riven in a way nothing else had since his deployment to Meridio's. Inside, the air smelled of metal and something darker, the coppery sting of old fear. Vena signaled silently. 2 fingers up. Proceed cautiously. Riven nodded and took point. Their footsteps sounded too loud, too human, against the empty cavern of crates and broken machinery. Flickering emergency lights painted everything in sickly reds and greens, throwing long shadows that danced and twisted at the edges of their vision. They weren't alone. Riven felt it, the way a soldier learns to feel the silent gaze of a sniper on his skin. A soft whimper drifted from behind a towering stack of shipping containers. Weapon raised, he approached slowly, heart pounding. When he rounded the corner, he froze. Containment pods, dozens of them, lined the floor, stacked 3 deep. Inside each one curled small figures. Children, alien, human, hybrid, sleeping or perhaps drugged. Vena gasped softly beside him, her composure cracking for the first time since he had met her. Riven moved forward, wiping frost from one pod's surface. A tiny face stared back at him, pale and still, a faint mist clinging to the child's lips with every shallow breath. He swore under his breath, low and savage. These weren't just refugees. These were captives. Cargo. Movement in the shadows snapped him back to alertness. A figure darted from cover. A skinny, ragged boy, no more than 8. His clothes were little more than scraps, and fear shone in his wide, green eyes. Before Riven could speak, Vena knelt and extended her hand, palm open, unthreatening. The boy hesitated, trembling, then crept forward. He spoke in a hoarse whisper, voice nearly lost beneath the hum of dying machinery. "They're coming back." Riven dropped to one knee beside Vena. "Who?" he asked gently, keeping his tone low, steady. The boy's eyes darted around the shadows, terrified. "The men with the cold eyes. They take the small ones first. Sell them. We hear them talk sometimes. About auctions." Vena's fingers tightened subtly into a fist. Riven saw it and felt the same cold rage rising inside his chest. "What's your name, kid?" "Then," the boy whispered. "Okay, then," Riven said, meeting his gaze. "You're safe with us. We're getting you out." But even as he said it, he knew their time was slipping away. Vena rose to her full height, scanning the far exits. "We can't move them all," she said, voice strained. "Not with just the 2 of us. And if we call for backup, Mole's enforcers will get here first," Riven finished grimly. "And bury this mess before command even blinks." Director Varix Mole. The name was acid on his tongue. The architect behind Meridio's rot. A man who wore loyalty like a mask and bartered lives behind closed doors. They needed evidence. Proof undeniable enough to expose even him. Riven tapped into his comm, setting it to secure low-frequency transmission. "Scan and upload. Full visual capture," he ordered. "We're bringing this to light." Vena moved quickly, recording every pod, every branded number, every chained wrist. Then hovered close to Riven's side, shivering despite the oppressive heat. "Are you going to take me home?" the boy asked, voice trembling. Riven's throat tightened painfully. He placed a firm hand on Then's shoulder. "We'll find you a home, I promise." A sudden screech of metal cut through the bay. Riven spun, weapon raised. But it was only a faulty crane arm, collapsing under rust and decay. Still, it was enough. From deeper inside the warehouse, alarms began to wail, sharp, ugly sounds that sliced through the night like blades. "We're compromised," Vena said, scanning for incoming heat signatures. "They know we're here." "Move," Riven barked, sweeping then into his arms. They sprinted through the maze of crates, cutting toward the southern access hatch. Behind them, the clatter of boots grew louder, enforcers spilling into the warehouse like a tide of death. Energy bolts whined past them, carving holes into the rusted walls. Vena spun and unleashed a surge of psi energy, slamming two mercenaries against a bulkhead with bone-snapping force. They broke into the open night, the storm above breaking at last into a savage downpour. Riven skidded into cover behind an abandoned skimmer, cradling then against his chest. Vena dove beside him, panting hard, her blade flickering in the rain. "They're jamming external comms," she said grimly. "We're on our own." "Wouldn't be the first time," Riven muttered, grinning despite the burn of exhaustion. Their eyes met, and something passed between them then, silent but undeniable. Trust, something rarer than gold on a world like Meridio's. Then tugged at Riven's jacket. "Please, don't leave them behind." Riven stared at the boy, then at the endless night behind him. Vena's hand closed around his wrist. "We won't," she said fiercely, as if vowing it to the stars themselves. The distant roar of skimmer engines grew louder. Mole's elite squads. Time was running out. They couldn't save everyone tonight. That was the bitter truth burning in Riven's gut. But they could start something. They could tear the first brick from the wall. Vena pulled a small hollow emitter from her belt and activated it. A stuttering projection of the warehouse's map bloomed between them. "There's an underground channel here," she pointed. "Emergency evacuation routes. Forgotten during the restructuring after the war." "Risky," Riven said. "Everything's risky now." He gave a sharp nod. "All right, we ghost them." Keeping low, using the chaos of the storm as cover, they sprinted for the drainage access. Thunder cracked above, illuminating the skeleton of the dying city around them. Behind them, mercenaries spread out, firing blindly into the dark, cursing the rain. At the hatch, Riven forced the ancient mechanism open with a grunt. It gave way with a shriek, revealing a chute slick with decades of grime. He motioned Vena through first, handing then down to her. "Stay close," he told the boy. "No matter what." Then nodded bravely, clinging to Vena as she slid into the darkness below. Hope. And somewhere, deep in the festering corridors of power, Varric's mole felt the first tremor of fear. Because the game had changed. Because two broken soldiers, human and alien, had found each other, and together, they were unstoppable. Riven followed, sealing the hatch behind them. The tunnel was a nightmare of stagnant water and crumbling stone, but it led them away from the worst of the pursuit. They emerged, soaked and filthy, into the outskirts of the refugee sector, a warren of twisting alleys and forgotten souls. Safe, for now. Vena leaned against a crumbling wall, catching her breath, then huddled between them, eyes wide but trusting. Riven wiped rain from his face and looked at her. "We're going to need help," he said. Her silver eyes locked onto his, fierce and unwavering. "Then let's find the ones who haven't given up yet," she said. For the first time in years, a spark of something dangerous and bright ignited in Riven's chest. The night was endless in the refugee sector, a labyrinth of sorrow and forgotten dreams. Riven moved like a shadow through narrow alleys, keeping them tucked close under his jacket, shielding the boy from the worst of the cold drizzle that had soaked the streets. Vena walked ahead, her senses attuned to every whisper, every scuff of a footstep. Her presence cut through the gloom like a lighthouse beam through thick fog, a reminder that not all lights had been extinguished here. They stopped before a squat, crumbling building that looked no different from the dozens surrounding it. Rusted signage swung on broken hinges above the door, once a med clinic, abandoned after the last border skirmishes. Now it was a safe house, a whispered secret among those who still dared to fight. Vena rapped sharply on the steel door. 3 short knocks, one long. Silence stretched, taut as wire. Then, a mechanical grind as hidden locks disengaged. The door cracked open, revealing a tall, lean woman with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes sharp enough to cut steel. She held a plasma pistol low but steady, until her gaze took in Vena and Riven, and the small boy between them. The weapon lowered immediately. "You weren't followed?" she asked, voice roughened by too many hard years. "No," Riven said, "but they'll be hunting by morning." The woman, who introduced herself simply as Senka, ushered them inside. The clinic's interior had been stripped down to bare essentials. Makeshift cots, ration crates, a cracked terminal humming weakly in the corner. A few others were already gathered, humans, Tlari, even a pair of small Elvarians, their feathery crests twitching nervously. As Riven settled then onto a cot, Senka leaned close, her voice low. "You're Salas," she said. "The one who refused Mole's commission." Riven gave a short nod. That refusal had cost him everything. Rank, safety, friends. But he had slept better for it. Senka's gaze flicked to Vena, lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. "And Katil, the ghost of the silver reaches." Vena's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Titles won't save anyone tonight," she said. Senka grunted agreement and motioned them to a back room, where battered maps and schematics littered a table. Riven and Vena leaned in, soaking in the details. Senka traced a gloved finger along a highlighted route. "This is where they move them, the kids. Underground. Away from prying eyes." "To where?" Vena asked. "Private docks mostly. From their off-world auctions, black market adoptions, worse. Mole's network runs through layers of dummy corporations. It's all sanitized by the time it hits official channels." Riven's stomach twisted. He had seen corruption before, but this was wrought down to the marrow. "Evidence," he said. "We need something that ties Mole directly." Senka tapped the map again. "There's a transfer tonight. Final shipment before the audit squads arrive from the Alliance. If you can intercept it and survive, you'll have more than enough." Vena straightened. "Where?" Senka hesitated, then pulled a data chip from her belt and handed it to Vena. "Coordinates are here, but be careful. They're expecting trouble now." Riven pocketed the chip, feeling its weight like a loaded pistol. They were outnumbered, outgunned, running on fumes. And yet, as he looked at Vena, at the stubborn tilt of her chin, the fire banked in her eyes, he knew they had no choice. For the others still trapped in cold cages. For the small chance that hope could be more than a foolish word whispered in the dark. They left then in Senka's care, promising the boy they would return. Then clutched Riven's hand fiercely before letting go. His small face set in a grim mask of bravery. "Bring them back," he said simply. Riven squeezed his shoulder, unable to find words strong enough. Outside, the rain had slowed to a sullen drizzle. A sickle moon cut through the clouds, casting long, thin shadows across the crumbling streets. The rendezvous point was across the old industrial district, deep within enemy territory. They moved fast and silent, becoming one with the ruined cityscape. As they neared the target, Riven caught the faint glimmer of movement ahead. Sleek transports, loading crews, armed guards, and children, pale figures herded like cattle into cargo haulers. He exhaled slowly, tightening his grip on his rifle. This was it. Vena tapped her comm implant. "Overwatch ready?" From a nearby rooftop, Senka's voice crackled through. "In position, covering south and west. You'll have to punch north yourself." "Copy," Vena said. Riven ran a last check on his weapon, then met her gaze. "You ready to burn it all down?" She smiled then. Fierce, beautiful, terrifying. "After you, Commander." They moved as one. The first guard barely had time to register the blur of movement before Vena's psi-blade slid between his ribs, dropping him soundlessly. Riven swept the perimeter, picking off two more with clinical precision. Chaos erupted almost instantly. Shouts, alarms, blaster fire slicing through the damp night. But Riven and Vena were already inside the transport yard, cutting a swath toward the cargo bays. One by one, the locks fell. One by one, the cages opened. Terrified children spilled into the shadows, guided by Senka's scattered team towards safe points. Mole's enforcers fought back, but they were trained for control, not for the kind of raw, relentless fury Riven and Vena unleashed. In the heart of the yard, a towering figure stepped into the open. Director Varix Mole. He wore a sleek combat exosuit, its armor gleaming black under the floodlights, his face hidden behind a grim visor. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone," Mole said, voice distorted through his helmet. "All this chaos. For what? A few broken children." Riven stepped forward, heart hammering. "For every life you stole," he said. Mole's laughter was a grating snarl. "You think this matters? Even if you kill me, the machine grinds on." Vena raised her blade. "Then we tear down the machine," she said. Mole charged. The clash was titanic. Mole's exosuit gave him brutal strength, but Riven and Vena fought like twin storms, their movements synchronized by an instinct forged in fire and blood. Vena ducked under a wild swing, slicing deep into the suit's joint. Sparks burst out. Mole roared, swinging toward Riven, who rolled and planted a shot directly into the reactor core on the backplate. The explosion staggered Mole. Vena seized the opening, driving her Psy-blade through the weakened armor into the monster beneath. Mole fell, choking on rage and disbelief. Silence fell over the yard. And then, slowly, almost disbelieving, a cheer rose from the shadows. Children. Survivors. Freedom. Riven collapsed to one knee, exhaustion slamming into him like a freight train. Vena stumbled to his side, laughing breathlessly, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't over. The road ahead would be long and brutal. But for the first time in years, they had won something real. They had ripped open the darkness and found the light still burning. They held each other there in the ruins, as the night began to break into uncertain dawn. The city awakened with the wounded cry of a thing long brutalized. Word spread faster than plasma fire. Varix Mole was dead. His grip shattered. The system he built bled from 100 invisible cuts. But for Riven and Vena, the victory was not a banner to be paraded. It was a burden. It meant more children to shelter, more corrupt officers seeking revenge, more powerful enemies sniffing the trail of rebellion. In the hidden depths of the refugee sector, the safe house buzzed with new urgency. Fresh faces arrived. Rescuers, sympathizers, some traitors too desperate to cling to Mole's sinking empire. Senka, bloodied but unbowed, managed the chaos with iron fists and sharper words. Riven sat on a cot against the far wall, arms wrapped protectively around Then, who hadn't let go of him since they returned. The boy had not spoken much, only clung tighter when new noises rose outside. His silent trust was both a bomb and a blade across Riven's heart. Vena crouched before a battered terminal, interfacing with old comm lines buried too deep to be jammed. Her silver scales glimmered under the broken lights, her focus absolute. The door creaked open, and Senka stepped inside. "They're coming," she said grimly. "Not Mole's people. The Alliance." Riven's gut clenched. "They think we staged a coup," Vena said, not looking up from the terminal. "Or worse, that we're trying to destabilize Meridios." "They're not wrong," Senka muttered. "But if they shut this down now, everything we bled for dies with it." Riven rose slowly, adjusting the sling on his rifle. His body ached in ways he could not name, but there was no room for that now. "We have evidence," he said. "The children, the records, the transport manifests. And all of it can be disappeared," Senka snapped, eyes blazing. "You know how these games work. We need a voice they can't ignore," Vena said quietly. Riven met her gaze. A slow understanding unfurled between them, dangerous and exhilarating. The Alliance could dismiss rebels. They could dismiss rumors. But they could not dismiss an undeniable, living, breathing parade of stolen innocence, standing before their own sanctified halls. "We take the children to the summit," Riven said, "to the heart of Alliance command." Senka stared at them like they were mad. "You'll be branded traitors," she said. "You'll be hunted." Vena smiled grimly. They already hunt us. Senka shook her head but stepped aside, a silent blessing. Preparations moved with frantic precision. Makeshift caravans were formed. Old smugglers' routes reactivated. Trusted allies, thin as paper but strong in spirit, volunteered to lead decoy convoys, risking their lives to scatter the Alliance's inevitable pursuit. Riven and Vena stayed with the largest group, the youngest, the weakest, the ones who could not defend themselves. The journey would be brutal. They left under cover of a false storm, slipping like ghosts through ruins and ravaged plains. The nights blurred into a relentless crawl of exhaustion and fear. Children huddled together in abandoned tunnels, whispered songs in languages Riven barely understood, clung to each other like flotsam in a churning sea. Sometimes, under the sallow light of ration fires, Riven caught Vena watching him, a strange look softening her sharp, war-tempered face. Not pity, not sadness, something older, stronger, something he dared not name yet. Once, during a stop at a crumbling fuel depot, then fell asleep pressed between them, small hand curled around Riven's fingers. Vena watched him for a long moment, then leaned in close. "You're good with him," she said softly. Riven shrugged, feeling a strange tightness in his throat. "He deserves someone who stays." She touched his arm, fleeting, almost shy, and yet it burned hotter than plasma. "I never thought I'd find someone who stayed," she murmured, so low he almost missed it. Before he could answer, a scout rushed back, panting, blood staining his sleeve. "Alliance gunships. 2 clicks out. They've cut off the eastern pass." Riven stood, mind shifting into cold calculation. "We split," he said. "Decoys draw their fire. We take the underpass through the Bonecrag ravine." "It's a death trap," Senka said, grim and approving. Vena's lips quirked into a half-smile. "Perfect." The next hours were a blur of desperate movement. The Bonecrag was as unforgiving as its name. Jagged stone cliffs, crumbling bridges, sudden rockfalls that could bury whole caravans. They moved fast, every second a borrowed prayer. Gunships roared overhead, scouring the ground with searchlights. Twice, they had to freeze under shallow outcroppings, hearts pounding as beams swept inches from their hiding places. The second time, then began to cry, silent tears carving trails through the dust on his face. Riven gathered him close, murmuring nonsense words, nonsense promises. Anything to hold back the tide of terror clawing at the boy's fragile spirit. Vena pressed close too, her presence a shield stronger than any armor. They survived. Barely. The final stretch loomed. A broken causeway leading into the heart of the capital. Beyond it, the spires of the Alliance command tower pierced the smog-filled sky, gleaming like polished knives. Their goal, their damnation, and perhaps their salvation. Riven crouched at the edge of the ruined bridge, scanning the patrols below. Heavy armor, full surveillance. There would be no sneaking past this. They would have to make themselves seen. They would have to force the Alliance to look. He turned to the ragged group behind him. Dozens of children, terrified but unbroken. Survivors. "You trust me?" he asked, voice raw. Small heads nodded. He turned to Vena, the woman who had become his anchor in this endless storm. "And you?" She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I trust you," she said simply. "With everything." The world narrowed to her eyes, bright, defiant, filled with impossible, reckless hope. Without thinking, Riven leaned in. Their lips met, a fierce, desperate collision. It was not gentle. It was not perfect. It was survival and fury, and everything they had never dared to want. When they broke apart, the night roared louder in his ears. But so did his heart. "Let's show them," Vena whispered. Together, they led the caravan onto the shattered causeway, stepping into the blinding floodlights as sirens wailed and soldiers surged forward. Weapons leveled. Orders shouted. Children cried. But Riven and Vena did not falter. They stood, arms raised, bodies shielding the youngest, refusing to yield. A commander barked into a megaphone, voice slicing the night. Stand down. You are in violation of Alliance Emergency Statute. Riven's voice answered, magnified by the comms rig Vena had hijacked hours earlier. We bring the evidence you ignored, he roared. We bring the victims you refused to see. The soldiers hesitated. The children stepped forward, tiny hands clutching makeshift banners scrawled with simple, devastating truths. We were sold. We are still here. We deserve to live. A ripple passed through the ranks. Some lowered their weapons. Some wept. The Alliance official tried again, but the crowd had seen. The world had seen. Cameras hidden among sympathizers streamed the scene live across a dozen systems. There would be no silencing it now. Vena squeezed Riven's hand once, fierce and proud. Behind them, hope rose like a second dawn. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of motion, questions, and shifting alliances. The footage of the children standing bravely beneath Alliance guns had spread like wildfire across a dozen systems, igniting outrage that even the high councils could not ignore. Protests sparked on core worlds where citizens had once claimed ignorance of the suffering on Meridios. Funding lines were audited, trade agreements frozen, entire branches of bureaucracy pulled apart under the weight of investigation. But for Riven and Vena, the victory came at a personal cost. They were summoned, not invited, into the gleaming halls of the council's inner chamber, a place where the floor itself shimmered with hollow projectors, casting illusions of endless fields and perfect skies, a brutal mockery of the real, broken world outside. Senka stood with them, still bearing the cuts and bruises of the Bone Crag escape, then clung quietly to Riven's side, his small face set, eyes too old for his years. Counselors of every species gazed down at them from tiered thrones, their expressions carved from stone. Humans with silvered temples, Tlari with long luminous tendrils coiled around ceremonial robes, Alvarians who spoke only through their twin-hearted empaths. A male counselor, draped in blue silk and wearing a seal of judgment at his throat, rose first. You stand accused of sedition, he said, voice devoid of warmth, of vigilantism, of endangering the structural stability of Meridios. Riven stood taller, the weight of every child's life pressing against his spine, forcing him upright. And we stand accused of compassion, he said without flinching, of refusing to let your corruption consume the innocent. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Vena stepped forward, her scales catching the light, her presence of force in the sterile, perfumed air. You allowed Varix Mole to build his empire under your watch, she said. You funded his operations. You turned away when the reports surfaced. You bathed in the blood money. An Alvarian empath shivered visibly at her words, feeling the depth of their conviction, the unspeakable horrors they spoke of. The blue-robed counselor lifted a hand, signaling for silence. The crimes of Varix Mole will be addressed, he said carefully. But the method by which you exposed them, reckless, unsanctioned, demands consequence. Senka snorted under her breath. Riven barely restrained the urge to laugh bitterly. Typical. Always looking to punish those who rocked the boat harder than the waves they ignored. Before they could speak further, a figure entered the hall, unannounced. A breach of protocol so severe the guards reached for their weapons. But the figure held no weapon. Only a child. A little girl with translucent skin and wide violet eyes, clutching a battered doll to her chest. Behind her came dozens more, children from the refugee sectors, led by volunteers who had dared everything to bring them here. They filled the chamber, a silent army of scars and broken dreams. Riven felt then squeeze his hand tightly. One by one, the children stood before the counselors, holding up makeshift signs, their simple, brutal words piercing the pompous grandeur of the chamber. We are not weapons. We are not property. We are not forgotten. For a long time, no one spoke. Even the most hardened counselors could not meet the eyes of the smallest survivors. The weight of shame was a living thing, smothering the air. Finally, a Tlari counselor, her tendrils trembling with something dangerously close to sorrow, stood. I move that all charges against these officers be dropped, she said, voice rough. Another counselor rose. Then another. In minutes, the tide turned. The blue-robed man who had spoken first glared at them, but even he saw the inevitable. He raised his seal of judgment and struck it once against the floor. "All charges dropped," he said through gritted teeth. "Effective immediately." The roar that rose from the gathered volunteers outside the chamber echoed through the walls. A thunderclap of hope. Senka sagged slightly with relief, running a hand through her cropped hair. Vena turned to Riven, her silver eyes shining. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said, pulling her close. "We did." They stepped forward together, into the storm they had created, and found it full of light. In the weeks that followed, change spread across Meridios like a second sunrise. The Alliance established a new bureau, independent and heavily monitored, dedicated to the rehabilitation and protection of displaced children across all territories. Vena was offered a position on the Oversight Committee, a symbolic gesture, some thought. She accepted anyway, but only on her terms. Real action, real accountability. Senka took charge of local enforcement, rebuilding with the rough, fearless love that only someone who had seen everything destroyed could offer. And Riven? He stayed. Not because of duty, not because of guilt, but because he could not imagine being anywhere else but among the broken pieces, helping to forge something new, something real. The safe house became an official shelter, but it kept its soul, ramshackle, rough-edged, fiercely loyal. Then found a home there, along with dozens of others, their laughter beginning to fill the cracks left by too many tears. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in molten gold, Riven found Vena on the rooftop, watching the stars emerge one by one. He approached quietly, but she sensed him as she always did. "You think they'll keep their promises?" she asked, not looking away from the horizon. "No," he said honestly. "Not all of them." She smiled, something sad and beautiful in it. "But we will," he added. She turned then, and in her gaze he saw the future they had bled for. Uncertain, battered, but alive. Without hesitation, he crossed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms. There was no desperate rush this time, no fierce collision. Only a deep, bone-deep certainty that they were no longer alone. Her forehead rested against his, her breath warm against his lips. "We found a home," she murmured. He kissed her, soft, reverent, tasting the salt of old battles, the sweetness of impossible victories. "Yeah," he whispered against her mouth. "We did." And around them, the city breathed again, a living, imperfect thing full of new dreams. Children played in the streets below. New banners fluttered in the fresh wind. The scars would remain. The memories would ache. But for the first time in a long time, hope was not a lie whispered in the dark. It was a promise. One they would keep. Together.